Good afternoon, Rotarians. Happy Pancake Day, Pancake Tuesday, Shrove Tuesday, and of course, Mardi Gras, which, as we all know, is Fat Tuesday. Welcome to the Rotary Club of Akron. It's so good to be here. We have a full agenda today. We have one of our own as a guest speaker, Nathanael Billow. So we want to give Thane maximum time to talk about his career. So at this time, we will have our Pledge of Allegiance, our four-way test, and our invocation today by Katie Miller. So if you're able, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And our four-way test: is it true? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Katie?
So most of you know that I'm a fun person, and I always try to be up and bubbly, but and very few of you know that a couple weeks ago, my sister suffered a mental health crisis that required her to be hospitalized. She's much better. We are in a recovery process. But in those 3 weeks, her son and myself have been her primary caregivers. And I share this with you for a couple reasons. One, if I haven't answered your email or your phone call or I'm not present, it's because my mind can't. Two, to show that even your fun time party girl who looks like she's got it all together on the outside doesn't. And I'd be willing to bet that everybody in this room knows somebody or themselves who suffers from anxiety or depression or mood disorder. And third, we shouldn't be ashamed to talk about it. And I was keeping it private for her, but it's time to talk about it. So I was looking for some inspirational words yesterday and came across a prayer that seemed to address it the way I wanted to. It begins with comfort and relieve those who are troubled in mind and spirit, bring them hope, peace, and the consolation of a loving community, grant patience and courage to the families and friends of those who are ill, increase their perseverance as they face challenges to recovery for their loved ones, protect and defend those living with mental illness from exploitation, addictions, and abuse. Lord, in your mercy, hear our prayer. Thank you.
Thanks again, Katie. Karen? Oh, there you are. It was like, where are you?
We have one visiting Rotarian, Chip Billow. And Chip, if you want to stand up, I think you should show everybody your special name badge for today.
You have a little item that Nathanael's prepared about our company for 75 and a half years since 1914. My great uncle, George, was one of the founding members of Akron Rotary, and I have his 1916 presidency.
Oh. All right, and then our other guest is Yara, who is our Rotary Exchange student.
Very good. Welcome to all. It's so nice to have our visitors. Did we have any Rotary ambassadors this past week? Cindy?
So excited. It's my first time. 4 years here, I get to be a Rotary ambassador. I went to the Crematory Rotary meeting last Thursday. Very interesting, very different than what we do here. But it was really neat, and I introduced the gal who works with me.
I introduced the gal who works with me to Rotary. she's going again this week and bringing a friend. So how cool is that? Just a little bit of time spent. So neat. All of that.
Great, thank you. Any other Rotary ambassadors? No? Okay. We're going to do a really, really quick ASAP happy dollars. So if you're happy and you want to show it,
Raise your hand.
raise your hand. Exactly. So Connor's going to do it.
Yeah.
And
Anyone?
you're on.
Anyone happy? All right, Dave.
So the happy dollar, we are going forward with our Akron Canton Food Bank service project tomorrow. 4:30 to 6:30, we have 15 people, including 5 students from Akron U. One of the, no thank you. One of the kids that Dr. Doug brought last week. So if you can still have time to make it, just let me know. You can sign up and see them out at 4:30. And afterwards, I think we're going to go out and get something to eat. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Steve.
I have 10 happy dollars, because I don't have change. My daughter Sloan plays with Tom's daughter at St. Sebastian on the 7th grade girls basketball team. And the A team where Sloan plays won the CYO championship on Sunday, which was very exciting. I played basketball my whole life, and I've never been so excited watching basketball than I was when your kids played. So, very excited to celebrate a championship. They had a game last night in another tournament, came out totally flat after the championship on Sunday, but still managed to win. So they'll play for another championship Thursday night. Thank you.
Congratulations, Steve. Awesome. Yeah, Susan and Sandy, I'll make the way around here.
And I'm super happy that Yara is here today. And how did I know it was Mardi Gras? It's because I've been working with our exchange students, and it was posted on Facebook that they're celebrating in Austria. They're celebrating in Austria, Spain, all over the world, Brazil, etc. And I wanted to use this opportunity to invite you all to come to Rotary Camp March 4th or 5th, because we're going to have the district training for the kids that are going to go out, the kids that are here. Yara will be there. Brilliant opportunity for you to get to know kids, and especially if you want to help with breakfast, because Jacinto said that you'll be there to help, and Liv will be there too. Anyway, and next week we will have, after this meeting, we'll have a meeting of the committee for exchange students.
Meeting for the exchange students next week after the club meeting. Thank you, Susan. Sandy, here we go.
I'm very happy that we are in the midst of accepting applications for the Akron Rotary President's Grant. There's information on your table. I also sent out an email to everyone. There needs to be a Rotary connection, so please think about those charities and service organizations that you know impact our community. I will help any way I can.
Thank you, Sandy. Here you go. Yes.
Thank you so much. I have 5 happy dollars for a couple of different things. First of all, thank you all. Some of you have actually taken advantage of my offer to come to some of our Akron Symphony rehearsals and backstage tours and things like that. Some of you have done that. It's been really, really fun. If anyone would like to talk about it at some point, that would be great. And we just found out that this coming Friday is the 70th anniversary of the very first concert the Akron Symphony ever performed in Akron. And it took place at the auditorium across the street at Central High School. So we had concert this week. We're celebrating all that. There's some information on your table about it. Please join us. Again, open invitation to anyone to join us at any time. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, yes. Laura?
Happy dollars. And I wanted to see if anybody was willing to sponsor an Eagle Scout for the March 19th banquet. Our keynote speaker that day is Julie Brandel, and you're still stuck doing it. Yes, you are.
So I'm looking for people who are either willing to come that day or are willing to sponsor an Eagle Scout. $100 will buy you and the Eagle Scout their dinner, and it also buys gifts for the Eagle Scout and a professional photograph and that. So that's March 19th. Even if you can't come, if you can help out, that's really helpful. Linda had already volunteered to do that, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yes.
Hi, it's so good to see everybody. I have $250 because I'm, after a long hibernation, I guess, I am sharing the Global Ties fundraiser. It's March 12th, and it's at the Akron Arts Museum. I hope anybody that would like information, please come and see me afterwards. It's going to be a fun event.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I have a couple as well. You'll find a couple of flyers on your table. All Ohio Pets is doing a service project this year. And if you click on the link, well, you can't click, it's a flyer, but if you scan the QR code on the flyer, it'll go right to an Amazon page that's already preset. You can buy items for young women and girls. And we want to do this instead of collecting hard goods and taking them down to Columbus, we want to do it online. So this would benefit a lot of folks, and it would make our club look good when I'm down there in Columbus. So please consider it. Thanks.
It's a competition. Julie's competitive side coming out. All right. I'm gonna have 10 of those 20. All right. So 5, because I'm happy that some of my Lambda Chi Alpha guys are showing up for the food bank. And then 5, because I was able to be here early today because the University of Akron recognizes today as President's Day, and classes are canceled because of calendar stuff that I needn't go into, but I've been announcing to my students, remember guys, you're off for Fat President's Day. Yeah, that one you know. Thank you, Dr. Doug.
Wait a minute, Dr. Doug. Fat President's Day?
Oh, there you go. You got, yes, right, Mr. Billow.
Hey, Connor, I have $5 for 5 generations of my family serving Akron as Rotarians.
Definitely worth celebrating. Thank you, Chip.
Hey, thanks, guys. Yes, I have $2 happy. First, I'm happy my dad is here with me today. Totally surprised. Didn't know he would be here, but my dad's the reason that I'm a funeral director as well as a Rotarian. He encouraged me to do both those things. I'm honored to have him. Very happy. And then second thing I'm happy about, there's some information on your tables. There's first events coming up in Akron next couple weeks. Akron Roundtable is hosting my friend Katie Najat. She's an Olympic gold medalist pole vaulter from North Olmsted. She just got married, so she goes by Katie Moon now, but she's speaking to the Akron Roundtable in March. She's a phenomenal, world-class athlete and world-class person. So please come and attend if you'd like. Second, coming up in May, Blue Coats Incorporated, which is a nonprofit made up of local Akron area professionals and business owners. We have our annual fundraiser, which is a golf outing at Firestone Country Club. Many Rotarians are also members of Blue Coats. It's a group that takes care of first responders, so our police, fire, and EMS that get hurt or killed in the line of duty. Everybody is welcome to come out and raise money with us. It's an awesome event. If you want to learn more, ask me, ask Tom Knauer, my dad, Connor, Steve Bossard will be there. So just let us know. Love to have you there. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Thane. So, yes.
Couple happy dollars. Speaking of basketball and the youth exchange, on March 15th, we're going to have a get-together with the youth exchange students from the district and also from District 600. We'll be at the Cleveland before the game to get to meet everybody, and then we'll have the game. The flyers on the table. We'd like to have some of you come and meet the students and see the Cavs win a game. So, thanks.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to add in my $2 happy. One, happy that Thane is here to present. It's always great to hear from one of our own. Second happy dollar, thank you to Stu for saving me on a pin once again. I can't speak to, I'm thankful we're a club that doesn't fine for not having your pin, because I owe Stu a lot of money. And then 2 or 3, so I'm borrowing a happy dollar for myself. But a third one, not to steal Tom's and ours thunder, but for an announcement, but the beta test of a Friday just breakfast meeting was well attended. It was great to see many Rotarians there. I know it's still in the early stages, but it was just really great to gather as a group outside of the regular club meeting. So, Noah.
Hi, everybody. I have two happy dollars. So number one, so nice to see Chip Billow here, and so nice to be represented from the Talmadge Rotary Club, who had a winner for the car, for the raffle car for the chili open. That was so great. And then my last one is it's the Polar Bear Jump this weekend on Saturday. So if you guys need something to do on Saturday, come out to the Portage Lake State Park and watch the jump. It's something to see. This year it benefits the Ronald McDonald House and Rotary Camp. I am not jumping, but I am raising money for the so-called chicken chili to jump for me. So if you guys if you want to support, just check out my Facebook, check out Dan's Facebook. We're all over there. But thank you. If you guys can come out and watch, it's something to see. It really is. So thanks.
Thank you, Mella. And I know we want to give Thane as much time as possible, but anyone online, we don't want you to feel left out. Any happy dollars online? All right, Linda, back to you. Speak now. Okay, we're good.
Great, thank you so much. On your table, there's also a flyer. We are still looking for host family or families for inbound students next year. So please consider the information is on the table, and we're looking to at least host one inbound student from a foreign country. And we're thankful that we have Yara as our inbound this year. So please consider next year. And with that, any other quick announcements? Okay, just a thank you to the Billow's family. I know that a couple months ago, the Matthews Children's Foundation Board trustees offered a grant, and the Billow's family is giving us to us for the Rotary Camp. So this was the second installment. So Thane gave me the letter today. So again, thank you to the Billow family so much again for thinking of us. So thank you. Appreciate that. All right, don't forget all those wonderful flyers on your table. And with that, Miss Jerry, I'm going to let you pop up and do the intro. Doesn't she look beautiful today? Her tights even have Mardi Gras on it, so she is definitely in the swing of things. So, and look at her mom. Her mom is equally decorated, so she has a beautiful headgear on. So, in the spirit of things. And don't forget, the bees are on the table for you, so help yourself to get in the mode. And Jerry, thank you.
I have the pleasure of introducing Thane. Nathanael is a funeral director and also serves as the Executive Vice President and Treasurer of the Billow Company. Prior to working in the funeral profession, Nathanael worked for Ford Motor Company as a Senior Financial Analyst at Ford's Global Product Development Center in Dearborn, Michigan. He, along with his sister Stacy, are sixth-generation members of the family to serve at Billow's and Bissler's. Growing up in the family business helped shape his personal belief that working as a funeral director is not only a career, but a life-dedicating vocation. In 2018, Nathanael successfully led the merger of his family's 148-year-old business, the Billow Company of Akron, with Bissler & Sons Funeral Home and Crematory. With the retirement of Mr. Rick Bissler, the move ensured that the community of Kent would continue to receive local family-owned care when faced with the loss of a loved one. Thane is a graduate of Talmadge High School, Grove City College, BS in Business Administration, summa cum laude, 2011, and the Fisher College of Business at The Ohio State University, Master of Business Administration, 2013. Nathanael is a parishioner at St. Patrick Catholic Church in Kent, and his Catholic faith taught him to embrace the philosophy of service above self. He generously gives of his time, talent, and treasure in service to Akron, and since returning home in 2017, has been appointed to serve on the board of directors for many notable organizations, including the Akron Better Business Bureau, where he serves as treasurer, the Rotary Club of Akron, where he serves as vice president and chair of the Rotary International Foundation, Blue Coats, Inc. of Summit County, where he serves as treasurer, the Akron Roundtable, where he serves as chair of the Development Committee, and the Pediatric Palliative Care Center at Akron Children's Hospital, where he holds the office of vice chair and treasurer. He is recognized by the Greater Akron Chamber and awarded, he was recognized and awarded their prestigious 30 for the Future Award, given to individuals who are trendsetters in their industry and who make an impact on the region through dynamic leadership and community service. When time permits, Thane can be spotted on local golf courses with his brother Chris or out running the trails of Akron Metro Parks. Thane?
Yeah, so thanks, Jenny. I work really hard, obviously, to build my bio, serve the community, but it always blows my mind how everybody still likes my dad more than me. So, yeah, my dad's the best. Really honored you're here. So today, why am I here speaking to you? This is a quick public services announcement for our club. So we have some small placards in the center of the table. Those are for our technology sponsors. So it's something that Cheryl Warren came up with earlier this year. And it's a way for club members to make a donation and invest into our club to help promote some of our new technological initiatives. So both Connor Jarvis and I were able to make a small donation. We're a pay-for-play club, so I get to talk to you today because of that. So happy to share with you a little bit about Billows and Bisslers. And then I'd also encourage everybody going forward, if you'd ever like to learn more about technology initiatives where you can support the club, just talk to a member of our board or to Cheryl. Okay, so I'm going to attempt to share my screen. I've got a very brief presentation. It's going to talk about kind of the history of funeral service. And I also want to take some time to talk about COVID and how that really impacted and upended our profession. And then I want to leave ample time at the end for questions, because I know this is something that's obviously going to impact all of us. So I'm going to try to get this screen shared. I might need some help from Brian, and then I'll be right back. Okay, how about that? Okay, so I'm a sixth-generation funeral director and fortunate to work for my family. Our company was founded in 1875 by my great-great-great-grandfather, Captain George Billow. He was a German immigrant, and he fought for the United States Army in the Civil War. He was very prodigious and had a number of children, and many of his children went on to work at the funeral home. So his sons, George and Charles, were both Akronitarians, and his other son, Edwin, worked there as one of the officers of the company. So Charles is my great-great-grandpa, and then George, who is very involved here at our club and was an officer, he was my great-great-uncle. Okay, so let's dig in. You'll see here, I know the lighting can be a little difficult because we have such good ambient lighting, but these are actually some advertisements from the 1870s advertising new funeral coaches, so horse-drawn hearses. What's really neat is that hearse that you see on the right, we still have it to this day. And from time to time, we'll use that at a special request for a family. Most recently, we used that in 2021 for a funeral in downtown Kent, which I'll share with you in a little bit, some photos about that. Yeah, it was really cool. It was really cool. So to start off, funeral service, I think we all know what it is, but if we're going to be a little bit more academic, what is a funeral? And I want this to be interactive, so can any of you define what a funeral is? There's obviously no wrong answers here, so anyone want to start?
Let me try.
Yeah, well, don't. Maybe before we go to Dr. Billow, maybe anybody else in the room.
Celebration. Way to remember a loved one.
Yeah, way to remember a loved one, you gather together, celebration of life. I have Canelo defines celebration of life there. That's another nebulous term. I think many of us have been to a celebration of life. We don't really know how to define it or what it is, but we know it when we see it. I've organized many celebrations of life. But we have all these terms, there's this nomenclature in the funeral profession. We kind of know what it is. It all impacts us. It's really hard to be scientific and define it. So we have actually defined it. So there is a definition of a funeral. There's a definition of a good funeral. And by law, a good funeral is any funeral that's done by Billows. So I'm just kidding. So there's actually two guys that literally wrote the book on funeral service. Dr. Thomas Long, who's a Presbyterian theologian, and Thomas Lynch, who's an Irish Catholic funeral director from Michigan. They got together and they actually wrote a book called The Good Funeral, and they really dissected all the things that we do as a profession, caring for the deceased, but also caring for their families. So a good funeral does two things. Number one, it gets the dead where they need to go, and it gets the living where they need to be. So all good funerals do two things: get the dead where they need to go, and get the living where they need to be. So that first part, it's really just logistics. And every funeral home can do that. We have automotive equipment, we have hearses, we bring an individual into the funeral home's care, we then take them to a cemetery or to a crematory. That's really just logistics, that's table stakes. But that second aspect of getting the family where they need to be, that is where a good funeral home and a good funeral director will hang their hat. And how do we do that? And that's why we're professionals, that's why it's tough. And we do that through ritual and ceremony. So things we do to get the family where we need them to be is we allow them to take physical leave of the body. So if you think about the way we experience life, right? We experience life through our senses, our eyes, our ears, our sense of smell, sense of taste. So too with death. We acknowledge death through our bodies. We acknowledge it physically with our eyes, through our senses. And what that does, that helps promote healing, and it also helps to make the death more concrete. We acknowledge the reality that has happened, and it's that first step that allows the family then to get on to healing. So we help the family take physical leave of the body. Many times that's done by having a viewing or maybe a private viewing at the funeral home to say goodbye. And we give the family an opportunity to gather and acknowledge that a few things have happened. Number one, that a life was lived, and in that life there's inherent dignity and sanctity. And also that life has been lost and will not be coming back. And we accomplish all these things by coming together. We share stories. We have something called the Ministry of Presence, and we kind of see that here at Rotary. There's kind of some energy, there's some magic that happens when we as Rotarians all gather together in the same room. So too when we have a funeral. We come together, we're there to support each other collectively as a community, as a family. We bear the load and the burden of that grief, and that's called the Ministry of our Presence. And we go through our tried and true rituals. So those provide comfort. I think any of us that have ever lost somebody we care about, maybe it's a dear friend, outside of saying, oh my God, usually the next thing you ask is, when's the service? I'd like to go and be there. So that's what we call the Ministry of our Presence. And it's really all those things that go into a good funeral. So funeral service, obviously, it's been around forever. It's the age-old profession going all the way back to the pyramid builders. But here in the United States, modern funeral practice really starts right around the Civil War. So what I'm going to do maybe over the next 10 minutes or so, just kind of walk us from kind of the Civil War period to today, and then talk about some of the disruption that's going on and how society is changing. And we can talk a little bit about the pandemic. So on the right, don't know if you can see him or not, but that handsome gentleman's our founder. That's Captain George Billow. And then on the left, that's an early picture of one of his wagons and some horses that he had. He started out, he kind of had all sorts of different jobs. He was a farmer, he sold insurance, he did a little bit of real estate. The war broke out because of his position in the city. He became a commissioned officer in the U.S. Army. He was actually with the Ohio 107th, which is for all the German-speaking troops from the area. So it was Summit, Medina, Portage, and Stark counties. He was an officer. Fun fact, John David Seiberling, F.A. Seiberling's dad, fought for Captain George. So Mr. Seiberling was a private, Captain George was an officer. So that was kind of the story between the Billows and Seiberlings. They went to church together. So it goes way back. But during this time, right around the Civil War, is really the first time that men were dying en masse away from home. And that led to some challenges, especially when it came to preserving the individuals. As you think about Civil War, men were dying in mass out at a battlefield. Their bodies had to be preserved and sent home. So that's when embalming became popular. It was right around the Civil War. President Lincoln, the U.S. Army generals had embalmers out deployed with the troops. They would embalm the individuals and send them home. And then there's a good book out there called The Lincoln Funeral Train. So President Lincoln was one of the first major characters in U.S. history that was embalmed, and his remains were sent by rail throughout the entire country so that folks that loved him and voted for him could pay their respects. So also during this time frame, many deaths were occurring at home. If an individual was embalmed, it was usually at the home or it was done in a designated space. Funeral homes didn't exist at this point. A lot of the century homes here in Akron, they've got those big, beautiful, wide doorways. That's not because it was the architecture at the time. It was practically so that the funeral directors could get a casket through the front doors and you'd be laid out in your parlor. In terms of services, viewings, coming together to say goodbye, having an organized church service, whether you're a Protestant, Catholic, or some other denomination, really became established parts of society. And really, as we get towards the 1900s, that's when the location of funeral services moved from maybe the home parlor going to the graveyard to a designated funeral parlor, or maybe going to a funeral home or to a church and then going to a cemetery. So on the right, tough to see the photo. We're getting some cloud cover, which is good. You can actually see the historic Billows. So that's the original Billow Funeral Home. It was built around 1910 or so in downtown Akron on Ash Street. It was the first of its kind. It was a modern marvel. It was one of the first funeral homes in Northeast Ohio, and that's where we operated out of from around 1910 up until the mid-1960s, when our leaders made the decision to seize that building through eminent domain to make way for the new Intervelt. So unfortunately, we lost our historic funeral home. So the invention of the automobile, I don't know why these photos aren't coming through, maybe having some issues there, but the automobile was invented in 1903 by my former boss, Henry Ford. And what that did is that allowed the geographic radius of funeral service to expand. So you could drive further in a procession and get out to cemeteries or churches that were a little further away. Around this time as well, coffins or caskets, I don't know what you refer to them as, they're both the same thing. But coffin production, it transitioned from kind of small artisan craft makers, maybe furniture makers that also make coffins on the side, to specialty large-scale casket manufacturers. And today in the United States, there's only 2 casket makers that control about 87% of the market. And they're kind of household name. Batesville and then Matthews Aurora, they're big multi-billion-dollar companies. They just control the market, and there's been so much consolidation. During this time frame too, 1900s, even up to the middle of the century, 1950s, 1960s, families were very much insulated from the death. Around this time, we have hospitals, we have dedicated places for folks to go and pass away, so the death would occur outside of the home. Families usually weren't there when the death occurred. Almost every family used the limousine. Services were largely run by the clergy and the funeral director. Almost everybody went to church. So when it came time to planning your funeral, you actually didn't decide when that would be. The priest or the pastor would work the funeral director, and Mr. Billow would work with Reverend Smith, and they'd plan your funeral for you. Families really didn't have much input. It was just the way funerals were done. They're very cookie cutter. So starting in the 1970s and 1980s, there were a number of scandals that plagued the U.S. funeral profession, mainly on the side of prearranged funerals. So it used to be such that if you wanted to prepay for your funeral, you would just go over and pay Mr. Billow, and then we would go and take those monies. We'd put it in a demand deposit account at First National Bank of Akron, and your money was there for when you needed the funeral. However, there were a lot of notorious characters that just took off out of town with the money, and they didn't worry about your prepaid funeral. So the FTC got involved, started investigating these crimes, and in 1984, they passed the first wholesale legislation that impacted the entire profession. That's called the FTC Funeral Rule. And the byproducts of that are every funeral home now has a commonized price list. There's a certain menu of offerings that every funeral home in the country offers. With that, we list prices for those items as well as the other services we can offer. Caskets, vaults, urns, all those things. There's just common pricing so you as a consumer can compare between funeral homes. And then the FTC also mandated wording for direct cremation, which is something that's really big in the funeral profession. Cremation rates have changed drastically over the decades, and a direct cremation and immediate cremation, that's where an individual is cremated. There's no public services or ceremonies whatsoever. The FTC mandated the wording there and also required every funeral home to provide a price for that most economical and minimal service. So cremation is really interesting because obviously society's grown a lot. Cremation poses some issues for the funeral profession because if you remember, we go back to that definition of a good funeral. We get dead where they need to go. We get the family where they need to be. For all of history, the ritual and ceremony were tied in with the location of the deceased. So many times the individual that had passed away was there in a casket. They were present. The two were linked together. What cremation did was it separated the disposition of the body from the ceremony or ritual. And why did that happen? So starting in the 1930s, many of the prominent Protestant churches in the United States began to relax some of their longtime stances on social issues, everything from divorce, cremation, abortion. So there was a little bit relaxing of these hard and fast rules. In the 1960s, 1963, the United States Catholic Church permitted cremation as an acceptable, they still discourage it, but it's an acceptable form of disposition. During this time as well, from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, there was just a lot of turmoil in long-standing trusted institutions, whether it was the government, big corporations, funeral homes, kind of like the pillars of society. Trust just evaporated in those groups. And then starting in 1997, the Catholic Church permitted cremation as well as the cremated remains, the ashes, to be present at church. So it's really a confluence of all of those factors, as well as the cost of funerals rising due to some of the pressures put on the funeral profession by suppliers like casket makers, vault makers, cemeteries. The price of traditional burials just went up so much, and the price of cremations remained very affordable. That, combined with a lot of these societal changes, led to a paramount shift in how people dispose of their loved ones' remains. So really starting in the 80s and 90s, and I want to give my dad a lot of credit because he was on the forefront of supporting dedicated hospice facilities. So he worked with his good friend, Justin Rogers, and they put in the Hospice Care Center over in Copley. And that was a place for individuals to go and rest and have some peace in their lives before taking their final breaths. And this trend of going to dedicated hospice facilities really started in the early 90s, and it continues on to this day. The impact that that had on the funeral profession is many families would be there at the time of the death. They would maybe be with their loved one when they passed away, and then they would not want to see their loved one again. And that's something we hear all the time, and it can be really troubling, I think, for somebody like myself and my dad to hear, where we'll make arrangements, we'll say, oh, we already saw mom, we don't need to see her again, or well, it'd be too tough to see her when she's dead. We hear it all the time, but we know that as funeral practitioners, as professionals that deal in death, dying, and grieving, it's really important that the family has a meaningful way to say goodbye. And we also know that being there and saying goodbye and acknowledging the reality of that death is so paramount to getting them on a good path towards healing. And grief, unfortunately, is horribly commercialized here in the United States. There's the Kubler-Ross wrote the 5 stages of grief, and we're supposed to believe it's like a graphic and it's a straight line, but we know it's not like that. Many times it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, or sometimes there's never even complete healing because you just have a permanent hole in your heart. And I think any of us who have lost somebody we really care about, we know life is just not the same without them. So I already hit on this a little bit. Cremation growing is a method of disposition. A couple statistics for you though. So in 1984, Billow's became the first funeral home to put in our own crematory and cremation chapel. And at that time, the cremation rate in the state of Ohio was about 10%. It was about 9 to 10%. So 1 in 10 families chose cremation, 90% of families chose burial. In 2018, that number is now over 50%, and in 2023, in the state of Ohio, it's about 60%. So 1984, Dad and Grandpa really got ahead of that trend, and we were able to put in our own cremation chapel. Economically, it didn't make sense, but we knew when it came to caring for families in the area, it was the right thing to do because it afforded them the peace of mind knowing the same funeral director that was caring for their loved one would also attend to the cremation. We wouldn't ship their loved one off to a third-party crematory. They'd be with us the entire time, and it would just afford them much higher levels of peace of mind throughout the process. What's interesting, though, is the funeral profession has very much struggled to adapt to cremation. I would guess, and I don't want to speak ill of my colleagues, but it used to be that funeral directors, yeah, we took care of human remains, but pretty much we were furniture salesmen. We just sold caskets. We made all your money. It's expensive. And so many funeral directors, when you eliminate the casket, which is not needed for cremation, they don't know how to serve people. They don't know how to properly run a business. They don't know how to care for people. And we see this not only locally, but nationally. There's so many funeral homes that are just struggling to serve today's families. Cremation is nice though. It's a lot more flexible, it's a lot more affordable, and it just gives us so many more options in terms of what we can do to honor someone. So consolidation, just want to mention this. So this is more so on the supply side. So just some crazy statistics. 1940, there were over 50 different casket manufacturers in the United States. Today, there's 2 that have 84% of the market. In terms of funeral coaches or a hearse, you can have one of 3 options. You can get a Cadillac, a Lincoln, or a Mercedes. And then in terms of the chemicals we use, embalming fluids, other type of chemicals, they are so important to understanding the human chemistry and biology. It allows us to properly preserve individuals for services. There's only 4 real options right now. So with such little choice, what that means is the power of those suppliers. They're a lot bigger than us. There's fewer of them than there are as us small independent funeral directors. They can take their prices way up. It's almost a near monopoly, and then we have no power over them. There's no one to switch to. So it's Economics 101, Porter's 5 Forces. You guys have probably studied that before. So what it's done is it's moved the real power to these large companies that control the supply lines. There's also been a lot of consolidation, a lot of M&A. It started in the 1990s. So there's 2 famous publicly traded companies, Service Corporation International, SCI, Fortune 500 firm based out of Houston. They own approximately 2,000 funeral homes and I believe 1,000 cemeteries in the United States. You can see their logo on the left, and over on the right was the Lowen Group. They were a main competitor to SCI. They purchased a number of funeral homes up in Cleveland. They unfortunately went bankrupt around 2000. But it's not only corporations that have gotten into funeral service. There's a lot of private equity. There's a lot of hedge funds that are getting into funeral service. And what they do is they'll go and they'll buy up a number of funeral homes in a given town, and then they'll get rid of Mr. Billow and Mr. Billow Jr., and then they'll replace us with a manager, and they streamline accounting, they streamline marketing, they gut the staff, and they try to run it almost as like a hub and spoke model, where they'll have maybe 1 or 2 funeral directors work at 5 or 6 funeral homes in the area, so they get all this back office efficiency.
Don't they still keep the names as if it's a different?
Exactly, yeah.
So it looks like there's 3 or 4 in the same town?
Correct, yeah, and what's wild about that too, in the state of Ohio, it used to be required that the managing funeral director's name was on the building. So we've never had that problem because we've been Billow since day one. But it used to be, there's a funeral home that's corporate owned over in Farallon. I mean, God, Dad, they had like 7 or 8 managers over a 10-year period, all these different names, and nobody knew who was actually there. And it wasn't until 2018 that the state of Ohio relaxed that rule. And now you can call a funeral home anything. You can call it Akron Funeral Home, Ohio's best funeral home, or you can call it Billow's. So a couple other interesting statistics. There's 22,000 funeral homes in the U.S. As of today, about 4,000 are owned by corporates or private equity. The remaining 18,000 are independent. So if you think about that, 4,000 are corporate owned, about 18,000 are independent. It's predicted that over the next 10 years, 1 in 5 funeral homes are either going to close or sell to one of these larger consolidators. And that's just because it's a really hard business. The hours are very tough. And if you think about how, I don't know, many of you have your own family businesses, it's really difficult convincing your kids to come work for you. It's just a reality where we're at right now. So many longstanding funeral homes are going to be sold just because they don't have that next generation ready to stand up. And just another statistic there, since 1984, there's been a 5% decline in the number of funeral homes in the United States. In Canada, it's been 25%. So 1 in 4 funeral homes in Canada is closed in the last 40 years. So that trend is predicted in the U.S. in really the next 10 or 15 years.
What happens to those of us who have pre-planned their funeral, that funeral home?
Sure. Yeah, so it's a good question. It was, what happens if you pre-planned your funeral? If you've prepaid, it is the law that you cannot prepay the funeral home. So remember that example earlier about the funeral director embezzling the money? So the law is such that if you prepay for a funeral, it has to go to a third-party institution. So either life insurance or a trust. And in the event that you want to transfer your pre-arrangements, you can go anywhere you'd like. It's a wonderful consumer protection. There's no financial penalty whatsoever. And that's just because if somebody pre-arranges with Billows, and if something happens to us or we get hit by a meteorite, they could transfer their pre-arranged funeral somewhere else and the money's there for safekeeping. So I want to quickly just touch on a couple things. Modern funeral homes, we really emphasize professionalism. We emphasize service. We emphasize being experts in grief, death, dying, and psychology. On-site crematories are so important to modern funeral homes. And then many of us offer either on staff or we partner with grief counselors that can assist with true ministry and family follow-up after the services are over. So lastly, just want to hit on COVID real quick. We've got about, looks like 7 minutes left. So COVID was something that obviously impacted all of us. But what I'd like to do is just kind of quickly share with you how that impacted us small town funeral directors. So what's wild is every city in the country was impacted by COVID, but it wasn't all at once. We know that in general, death rates were up about 20% the last few years. A lot of that was COVID, but not all of it was COVID. And the way it would happen is those little hot spots. And we knew when things were bad here in Akron, we knew the winter of 2021 and 2020 were very bad. And what we saw is in a given month, if we serve about 50 families at Billows, when we were at a peak of COVID, we'd serve about 100. And we didn't have extra staff, there was nobody coming to help us, but there were just so many people would be dying at once. And then it would kind of slowly go back to normal, and death rates would normalize. Then we get another hot spot. So it was just tremendously difficult for funeral homes to keep up. And it was funny, I was looking at a picture of our Christmas party, Rotary Christmas party at Bounce last year. And I was like so tired and pale. That's because we were going through a hot spot and I just wasn't sleeping. It was insane. I've never seen anything like it, and my dad hasn't either. Funeral homes, we weren't allocated PPE. All the PPE was allocated to our hospitals, and rightfully so. So we were told to just follow our basic sanitation and protection standards. And we really didn't know what we were dealing with the virus at the time. See, if you guys remember, like I was washing off my groceries. Like it was just a weird world that we were in, and we didn't know what we were dealing with. The impact that it had on families, and maybe I'll end with this, is families really weren't presented with the opportunity to say goodbye, whether it was at a hospice or a hospital. My grandma and grandpa died in the first week of the lockdowns. We couldn't be there with them when they passed. That was really tough for us. Everyone was worried about whether like the virus would jump from the deceased and like would it infect us? If we gave grandma a hug in the casket, would we get it? We as embalmers, would we contract the illness if we were doing the embalming? Locally, there were some limits on the number of folks that could attend a funeral. It was 10 here in Summit County. So grandma and grandpa Billow had a big family. We had to go in 3 waves to say goodbye to my grandparents, just because we were worried about somebody from the health department. And no offense to the health department, my mom was the president of the health department in 2020, but we were worried about violating the health department codes. We're obviously rule followers, so we had to go in 3 waves, and we had to go to the cemetery separately. The churches were closed. We had to wait about 18 months to have a proper funeral at St. Paul's for my grandma and grandpa. And there was also limited community support, that ministry of presence. We couldn't gather together. Many of you reached out, texted us, called us, came to visit us, but we couldn't get together like we wanted to, and we knew we needed to. And one thing that we did was really interesting was a lot of families wanted to have a service, but when the time was right. So we at Billows made a pledge that we knew we couldn't give them the service that they wanted right now, so we would help them the best that we could, and then down the road when they were ready, we'd give them another complimentary service free of charge in whatever way that looked like. So, got about a couple minutes left, and I don't know if I want to keep presenting on the funeral profession and COVID. It might be good to hear from you to see what questions you have. So maybe if it's okay with you, Connor, we could just pass the mic.
Absolutely, and I was going to say, I remember the Christmas party at Bounce last year, and you are ever the professional. You gave a beautiful invocation in spite of your state that no one would have known. So just thank you for your service and all you do for the community, and you clearly know your stuff as we would expect. So this is fantastic. Any questions here? Yeah, Karen, and then Dan, and then Tom, and then Olivia.
Could you talk a little bit about pre-planning from the standpoint of a lot of people here have parents they're taking care of, and if there's a major medical and someone has to go on Medicaid, it always broke my heart when people didn't realize pre-planning could be included in that, and then they lost their parent and they had to pay for a funeral. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yep. Yeah, so many folks in the area choose to go on Medicaid. And what Medicaid is it's for individuals that have they're below a certain number of assets to their name, and they can still get the care that they need, whether that's at a nursing home, at a hospice facility, or other types of care provided at the home. So what many folks do is they'll do what's called a Medicaid spend down, and your accountant, attorney, financial advisor, they can assist you with these things. Insurance agents are also very good for helping families. What they can do is they can set monies aside to pay for their final expenses, to pay for their funeral, and qualify themselves for Medicaid. And the monies that they set aside are not deemed an asset by the United States government. It's Medicaid exempt, and what it does is allows to pay for their final expenses. So it's something many folks take advantage of.
I got two questions, but I'll only ask one. But is there any seasonality to death over? I mean, it seems like Christmas.
Yeah.
Everybody hangs on till Christmas.
Yeah, so it's remarkable, and it's really, I think it comes down to a couple things. Number one is from like a public health standpoint. If you look at the nature of infectious diseases, especially in kind of the Midwest and the Northeast, there's a lot of folks that die of COVID, that die of the flu, and we know that the incidence of those types of infectious diseases really start around like late November, and they go through kind of the end of February. So death rates are incredibly cyclical, they're incredibly seasonal, and they're very predictable. And we know that death rates are highest in Northeast Ohio, starting around mid-November, and then it really starting to lighten up around President's Day, maybe to the end of the month. And then every once in a while, there'll be like a really bad norovirus flu that comes out in March, and it really impacts those that are most vulnerable in our society. And what's crazy about COVID was it followed that same cyclicality, but it was at such a more higher incidence, and there were so many people that got so sick and unfortunately lost their lives.
Can you explain how a disposition takes place when somebody dies in a hospital of an illness or natural cause? Not a crime, but does the hospital make a call to you? Do you guys work around the clock? Is there a time limitation with which you have to pick up the body and get it back to the home?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So here in the state of Ohio, there's something called a competent observer. And many times those are individuals from our medical profession, like a good doctor, a good nurse, and they will be with the family, they'll be with the deceased when they take their last breath. And that independent competent observer works with the family to determine which funeral home will be assisting them. And then many times, kind of the rule of thumb that we have internally is no matter where a death occurs, if it's within driving distance, we're going to be there within 45 minutes. And then there's some places, like hospitals have their own morgues, and hospitals are such large entities, they're really like a living organism. Many times if a death occurs, let's say on the ICU floor, we may not be able to get our staff there, and they may not have the individual ready for a few hours. But by and large, it usually happens almost immediately. We have staff available 24/7. I always say this, it's a fun game, but maybe we'll play later. But if you want to come up with a profession that it's Christmas Eve, it's 10 or 11 p.m., you have an emergency, and like you need to call somebody, and guaranteed they'll be there at your house in 1 hour, we'll all go around the room and we'll pick somebody that's going to do that. I'll go first and I'll say funeral director. I don't know who else is on that list. So it's just the nature of what we do in our service to the community.
Sandra, can you click stop share with questions?
Yeah.
For those folks online, and then sorry.
Okay, this is going to be kind of a weird question, and I'm going to try to keep my preface really short. But when I was in college, I took a class called Death and Dying, and it was really interesting, and a lot of the stuff we talked about, we learned in that class. And I remember one of the things that we touched on in that class was a struggle that funeral directors can kind of have sometimes when you try to market your product, because it's not like any other product out there. Is that something you guys struggle with? Because you can't be like, look at this car I have for you, or I can do your taxes.
Right. Well, it's a really good question, Liv. And my dad is really a historian, not only of our company, and he's a good steward of our company, but he's also a steward and a historian of the funeral profession. And we're a member of a group called Selected Independent Funeral Homes, and it's the premier trade association for family-owned firms across the country. It's about 600 of us. We actually had a convention in the 1930s to come up with an answer. Is it morally and ethically acceptable to market a funeral home? And what I've found is, obviously, the best type of marketing we can do is we serve a family, we lay out our heart and soul for them, and then they will be pleased with the way that we treated them, and then they'll come back to us because we treated them so well. And then they're going to tell their friends and family, hey, go to Chip Billow. He's such a decent man. He'll take good care of your mom. However, we do need to market ourselves. We are a modern day business. And the way we do that is usually through things like Rotary, through sponsorships. We do some billboards. We do a lot of public radio. So we'll sponsor the Summit or NPR. But it's really hard to market a funeral home because it's not like, hi, I'm the best funeral director in town. Come to me. I'll give you a $100 coupon. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, nobody would do that. It's a challenge.
Thank you, Thane. Yeah, do we have time for one more, Linda, or do you want to wait till? Okay, yeah, Cindy. I was going to give it to Dan for his second question, but all right.
You mentioned how it's about getting the family where they need to be. How has it changed when people do the direct cremation, and therefore when you go to the celebration of life or the funeral, the body isn't there? How then do you get past that?
Yep. Well, it's really tough because I think you guys know this. When you attend a funeral and the person that you know is laid out or they're in a casket, the mood is different. It feels different. It's more reverent. And then we know that when we have a chance to see the family, when we have a chance to pay our respects to the individual's past, it's different. It's a different experience. Your question was very good. And hypothetically, right, if that family is going to have some sort of gathering, let's say it's a party or a celebration of life, they're doing something. They're acknowledging that the life is lived. They're getting together. So maybe they're not having calling hours at Billow's and then going down to St. Bernard's for Mass, but they're doing something. The most difficult thing that we see, and kind of related to Liv's question about marketing and selling, we know that funerals matter. We know that acknowledging that individuals have passed, coming together, they do matter. It's really tough for us to try to tell a family in a very short period of time, I think you should do something. It's just like if you go to, you break your ankle, you're going to go to the surgeon. He's going to prescribe what you should do. When your hearts break, you go to a funeral director. We prescribe what you should do. Yeah, there's a cost to doing it, but it's for your own benefit. My dad always says it's better to have one funeral than to have 10 or 15 funerals down the road when the person you didn't know sees you at Acme and they came up and say, oh my God, I saw mom died. We didn't have a chance to go. Oh, well, we didn't do anything. And then it brings it up every single time. There's no closure. And it's really about that closure. That's what allows families to move on towards healing. And if you never acknowledge that it happened, you're never going to get better.
Thank you, Thane. Fantastic.
Thank you, guys. Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Okay.
Can we,
Many thanks, Thane.
By the way, my dad thought about 20 tickets.
If you did, if you put the money in the box.
It was on credit card and it was.
Oh, it looks like you had, it was $12.
I did not hear that, it's a long story.
David Miller set me up, though.
All right, so let's see what we got.
And the tradition of our guest, please pull a one number.
Okay. It is 229-294.
Oh, good. All right, Dr. Rob. Just FYI, the beads on the table, some of that, if you'd like to take some, and then under your water glass, look and see at each table there's a smiley face that looks something like this. Should be underneath your glass. All right, there's a cookie in the middle of the table that is from Sweet Mary's Bakery. If you know Sweet Mary's Bakery, it's here in Akron. So enjoy a Mardi Gras cookie if you found the happy face on the bottom of your water glass. Again, lots of information. Please take some of the flyers with you, and we look forward to seeing you again next Tuesday, same place, same station. And Thane and your dad, thank you so much for being here today. You did an incredible job. It's not easy to listen to. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.